Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a rancher who followed crying sounds at dawn. Tom Harrison discovered an Apache child buried in leaves, but dangerous men were hunting her. But the outcome exceeded all expectations. Please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're listening to this story from. The Dawn Discovery. The first pale light of dawn crept across the Arizona territory as Tom Harrison stepped out of his ranch house. October 1885 had brought an unusual chill to the high desert, and he pulled his worn leather jacket tighter as he headed toward the barn. At 42, Tom had spent 15 years building his cattle ranch 30 miles southeast of Tucson. The isolation suited him. After losing his wife Catherine to typhoid 3 years earlier, he found solace in the demanding routine of ranch work and the companionship of his cattle and faithful horse, Duke. As Tom walked toward the barn, an unexpected sound stopped him cold. Carried on the morning breeze was the unmistakable sound of crying, human crying, and heartbreakingly young. Tom stood perfectly still, straining to locate the source. The crying came in waves, sometimes clear and desperate, other times muffled. It seemed to be coming from the creek bed that ran along his property's eastern edge, where cottonwood trees provided the only shade for miles. Grabbing his rifle, a necessity in this frontier country where Apache raids remained a real danger, Tom set off toward the creek. The crying continued, growing clearer as he approached the grove of trees. The creek bed was mostly dry, except for scattered pools from recent rains. Tom could see the crying was definitely coming from among the fallen leaves beneath the largest cottonwood. The ancient tree had dropped its golden leaves in thick drifts that rustled in the breeze. One particular pile of leaves seemed to be moving slightly, rising and falling with the crying. Setting his rifle within reach, Tom knelt and carefully brushed away the leaves. What he discovered made him catch his breath in shock. Partially buried was a small child, an Apache girl who couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old. Her long black hair was matted with dirt and leaves, her traditional deerskin dress torn and stained. But what struck Tom most was the terror in her dark eyes as she looked up at him, instinctively trying to burrow deeper despite her obvious exhaustion. "Easy there, little one," Tom said softly, keeping his voice gentle while slowly reaching out. "I'm not going to hurt you." The child's crying stopped the moment she saw him, replaced by tense silence that was somehow more heartbreaking. She watched his every movement with the wariness of a wild animal ready to bolt. Tom could see scratches and bruises on her skin, and her lips were cracked from dehydration. "Are you hurt?" Tom asked, knowing she probably didn't understand English, but hoping his tone would convey peaceful intentions. "Where's your family, child?" At the mention of family, the little girl's composure cracked, and fresh tears streamed down her dirt-stained cheeks. She whispered something in Apache, her voice barely audible, but Tom didn't need to understand the words to recognize the anguish. Tom looked around for clues about how this child came to be alone. About 20 yards upstream, he spotted the remains of a small camp, cold ashes, scattered belongings, and ominously dark stains on rocks near the water that looked like dried blood. The implications hit him hard. Apache families didn't travel alone through this territory without good reason, and the evidence suggested something violent and recent. The child had probably been hiding since yesterday, surviving on terror and the instinct to remain hidden. Tom turned back to the frightened girl, his heart aching for what she must have witnessed. Whatever happened to her family, she was now completely alone in a hostile world, and without help, she wouldn't survive much longer. "Listen to me, little one," he said, slowly removing his jacket. "I know you're scared, and I know you don't trust me, but you can't stay out here. You need food and water and somewhere safe." The child shrank back as he approached with the jacket, but Tom moved deliberately, wrapping it around her small shoulders. She was shivering, from cold, fear, or shock, but the warmth seemed to provide some comfort. "My name is Tom," he said, pointing to himself. "Tom, can you tell me your name?" The little girl studied his face for a long moment, as if deciding whether he could be trusted. Finally, in a voice so quiet he had to strain to hear, She whispered, "Aiyana." Tom gently lifted Aiyana into his arms and began walking back to his ranch house. As he carried her, he had no idea this moment would mark the start of the most important and dangerous chapter of his life. The morning sun climbed higher into the desert sky, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out. But for Tom Harrison, the only sound that mattered was the gradual quieting of a frightened child's breathing as she finally allowed herself to rest against his shoulder, trusting, for the first time in days, that she might be safe. The delicate bond. The walk back to the ranch house felt endless, with Aiyana's small weight serving as a constant reminder of the gravity of Tom's situation. The little girl had fallen into exhausted sleep against his shoulder, but even unconscious, her tiny hands clutched desperately at his shirt. Tom's mind raced with implications. In 1885 Arizona Territory, relations between white settlers and Apache remained fraught with decades of violence and mistrust. The Apache Wars had officially ended months earlier with Geronimo's surrender, but tensions ran high. Many settlers still viewed any Apache with suspicion, and harboring an Apache child could be seen as treason by some neighbors. As he approached his modest adobe house, Tom spotted a dust cloud on the southern horizon. Riders were approaching, several of them. His stomach tightened with apprehension as he quickened his pace, reaching his front door just as Aiyana stirred. Her dark eyes opened slowly, taking a moment to focus before the morning's events flooded back. She tensed immediately, looking around with alert wariness that had probably kept her alive. "It's all right," Tom murmured softly, pushing open his door. "You're safe here." Tom's home was spartanly furnished but clean. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a rough-hewn table in the center. A single bedroom lay beyond a curtained doorway, the unmistakable stamp of a man living alone. Tom gently set Aiyana on a chair, where she immediately drew her knees up and wrapped her arms around them, making herself as small as possible. Her eyes darted between Tom and the windows, every muscle coiled for flight. "You must be hungry," Tom said, moving slowly toward the kitchen. "And thirsty, too." He ladled water into a tin cup and offered it to Aiyana. She stared at it for several seconds before carefully reaching out, her hands shaking as she drank deeply, as if she hadn't had water in days. While Aiyana drank, Tom prepared bread, cheese, and dried meat. He had little experience with children. He and Catherine had never been blessed with any, but figured the basics were universal. The hoofbeats grew louder, and Tom moved to peer through the curtains. 3 riders approached. Sheriff Bill Crawford from Tucson with 2 deputies. Tom's blood ran cold. Had they come about the massacre? Had someone seen him with Aiyana? "Aiyana," he said quietly. She looked up with wide, questioning eyes. "Some men are coming. They might not understand about you being here. I need you to hide." Though she couldn't understand his words, Aiyana grasped the urgency in his tone. When Tom gestured toward his bedroom, she slipped off the chair and followed, moving with silent grace natural to her people. Tom's bedroom was simple, a bed with worn quilt, chest of drawers, and small window facing the mountains. Without hesitation, Aiyana crawled under the bed and curled up in the shadows, becoming nearly invisible. "Stay quiet no matter what," Tom whispered, then returned to the main room just as the knock came. "Morning, Tom," Sheriff Crawford said, touching his hat brim. Crawford was a lean, weathered man in his 50s who had worn badges in various frontier towns for over 20 years. His deputies flanked him on either side. "Sheriff Crawford," Tom replied, working to keep his voice steady. "What brings you out this way? We've had reports of trouble. Apache trouble. A family was found massacred about 15 miles southeast yesterday evening. Looks like tribal dispute, but we're checking with all ranchers to make sure everyone's safe." Tom felt his heart skip but maintained composure. "Haven't seen any Apache around here. Been quiet as usual." "Mind if we come in and talk?" Crawford asked, though his tone suggested it wasn't really a request. Tom stepped aside, allowing the 3 men to enter. They looked around with practiced lawman's eyes, taking note of everything. Tom held his breath, praying Aiyana would remain silent. "Thing is, Tom," Crawford continued, settling into a chair. "We found tracks leading from the massacre site. Small tracks, like a child. Trail went cold after a few miles, but headed this direction." "A child?" Tom asked, hoping his surprise sounded genuine. "Apache girl, from the footprint size. Probably 5 or 6 years old. If she's out there alone, she won't last long in this country." Crawford leaned forward. "Now, Tom, I know you're decent. If you happen to come across a child like that, hurt and scared, I know you'd want to do the right thing." "What would be the right thing, Sheriff?" "There's an Apache reservation 2 days' ride north. That's where she belongs, with her people. Of course, some folks in town think any Apache, even a child, might grow up to cause trouble." The implication hung heavy. Crawford was giving him an out, a chance to turn over Aiyana if he'd found her. But Tom understood that not everyone would be as reasonable, and Aiyana's safety was far from guaranteed, even if he did the right thing. "I appreciate the warning, Sheriff. I'll keep my eyes open." Crawford studied Tom's face for a long moment, and Tom felt the experienced lawman suspected more to the story. But finally, Crawford nodded and stood. "You do that, Tom. And remember, if you do come across this child, best thing for everyone would be getting word to me right away." After they left, Tom waited until their dust cloud disappeared before returning to his bedroom. He found Aiyana exactly where he'd left her, but her eyes were wide with terror. "It's all right," Tom said softly, extending his hand. "They're gone." As Aiyana slowly emerged from hiding, Tom realized the easy part was over. Now he had to decide what to do with a traumatized Apache child in territory where her presence could mean danger for both of them. A dangerous alliance. 3 days had passed since Sheriff Crawford's visit, and Tom found himself settling into an uneasy routine with his unexpected guest. Aiyana had gradually begun to trust him. Though she remained skittish and ready to bolt, she had learned to recognize his footsteps and would peek out from hiding when he called her name softly. Communication was limited but growing. Tom had taught her basic English words: water, food, safe, while she shared Apache words with him. Her favorite spot was a corner where she could see both the door and window, maintaining escape routes. On this morning, as Tom prepared breakfast, the sound of an approaching horse sent Aiyana scrambling under the kitchen table. But this time was different. Instead of multiple riders, this was a single horse moving at an unhurried but unsteady pace. Tom peered out and saw a sight that made his blood run cold. An Apache man, probably in his 30s, rode a paint horse while leading a pack animal. What made Tom's heart race wasn't just the Apache's presence, but how he rode, wounded, slumped forward, barely staying mounted. "Aiyana," Tom called softly. The little girl emerged, took one look out the window, and her entire demeanor changed. Her eyes lit up with recognition and hope as she began speaking rapidly in Apache, pointing toward the approaching rider. The man finally reached the ranch yard and slid from his horse, landing heavily on his knees. Tom could see he was badly injured, with a blood-soaked bandage around his left shoulder and exhaustion etched across his weathered features. Aiyana burst through the front door before Tom could stop her, running toward the injured man while calling out in Apache. The man looked up at her approach, and despite his pain, his face broke into profound relief. He spoke to her in their native language, his voice weak but urgent. Tom approached cautiously, rifle in hand, but not threatening. The Apache man looked up with dark eyes, showing wariness but desperate need for help. "You help, little one?" the man asked in heavily accented English, gesturing toward Aiyana. Tom nodded slowly. "She's been safe here. Are you her father?" The man shook his head. "Uncle, Joaquin." He touched his chest. "Her family." He made a cutting gesture across his throat, expression growing dark with grief. "Who did it?" Tom asked, though he suspected the answer. "White men, not soldiers. Men who take Apache children, sell." Joaquin's English was limited, but his meaning was clear enough to turn Tom's stomach. Tom had heard rumors of such men, outlaws who preyed on isolated Apache families, killing adults and taking children to sell as servants or worse. It disgusted even hardened frontier residents, but persisted because it was profitable. "How did you find us?" Tom asked. Joaquin pointed to Aiyana, then himself. I track, follow horse prints to creek. Find bodies of my brother, his wife, follow small tracks here. He looked at Tom with something approaching gratitude. You hurt her, you feed her. Why? Because she's a child, Tom said simply, and she was afraid. Joaquin studied Tom's face, as if reading truth in his expression. Finally, he nodded slightly. You good man, but dangerous for you. If other white men know, I know the risks. Joaquin struggled to his feet, wincing. I take her now. Go to reservation. She be safe with our people. But Aiyana, listening with growing alarm, suddenly grabbed Tom's arm and began speaking rapidly to her uncle. Whatever she said caused Joaquin to raise his eyebrows in surprise. She say she no want to go. She say you good man like grandfather. She feels safe here. Joaquin looked confused and troubled. Tom knelt to Aiyana's level. Over the past days, he'd grown attached to the little girl in unexpected ways. Her presence had filled a void in his lonely existence he hadn't realized was there, but keeping her could mean death for both. Aiyana, he said gently, your uncle wants to take you to be with your people. You'll be safer there. She shook her head vigorously and said something stubbornly in Apache. Joaquin translated with a slight smile, despite the situation's seriousness. She say reservation is prison. She say white man's government put Apache in cage like animals. She rather stay with good white man who treat her like family. Tom felt his heart breaking. This brave little girl had endured more trauma than most adults and was now asking him to protect her from what should have been salvation. Joaquin, what if she stayed here for a while, until things settled down? Joaquin's expression grew serious. Very dangerous. For you, for her. If white men find Apache child here, then we make sure they don't find her. You would risk your life for Apache child. Tom looked at Aiyana, watching him with hopeful eyes, realizing she had stopped being just a lost child he was helping and had become someone he cared about deeply. Yes. Joaquin was quiet, clearly wrestling with a difficult decision. Finally, he spoke. I stay too. Few days. Help watch, help protect. These men who killed her family, they still looking. Tom felt a chill. How do you know? I follow them after I find bodies, hear them talking. They have buyer waiting for Apache girl child. They no give up easy. They think maybe she go to white man's ranch. Joaquin's expression was grim. They start checking ranches, maybe 2 days before they come here. The alliance between a lonely rancher, wounded Apache warrior, and traumatized child was unlikely and dangerous, but it was all that stood between Aiyana and a fate worse than death. The final stand. 2 days later, Tom's worst fears became reality. The sun was setting when Joaquin came running from the barn loft where he'd been keeping watch. They come, he said tersely. 3 men, 1 mile out. Tom's heart pounded as he looked at Aiyana, who had been helping prepare dinner. Over recent days, she had begun to smile and even laugh once when his Apache pronunciation went completely wrong. Now, seeing fear return to her eyes, he felt fierce protectiveness surge through him. The root cellar, Tom said quickly, pulling up wooden boards that concealed the hidden space beneath his kitchen floor. Remember what we practiced. Aiyana nodded solemnly and climbed into the small underground space Tom used for storing vegetables. There was barely room for her to lie down, but it was completely hidden when the floorboards were replaced. No matter what you hear, don't come out until I call your name 3 times, Tom reminded her. She nodded bravely. Tom replaced the boards and scattered flour across them to disguise disturbance. Joaquin positioned himself in the barn with Tom's spare rifle, despite his injured shoulder. 3 riders emerged from twilight. Even at distance, something menacing marked their approach. The leader was tall and thin, with a scarred face and cold eyes. His companions were shorter but heavily built, comfortable with violence. Evening, the scarred man called as Tom stepped onto his porch. Name's Fletcher. We're looking for something that belongs to us. Don't know what you mean, Tom replied, keeping his voice steady. Fletcher smiled without warmth. Apache girl, about 6 years old. We tracked her this direction. Haven't seen any Apache around here. Mind if we look around? It wasn't really a question. The three men searched his house with practiced efficiency. Tom's heart hammered as they walked directly over the concealed root cellar, but the hiding place held. After 20 minutes, they emerged empty-handed but unconvinced. "Funny thing," Fletcher said, studying Tom's face. "We found tracks leading right to your property." Before Tom could respond, a rifle shot cracked from the barn. One of Fletcher's men spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. Joaquin had made his move. "Apache!" Fletcher shouted, drawing his weapon. A brief but intense gunfight followed. Tom dove behind his water trough, while bullets splintered wood around him. Joaquin kept the outlaws pinned with accurate fire despite his wound, but odds were against them. Fletcher and his remaining man began flanking the barn. Realizing Joaquin would soon be overwhelmed, Tom made a desperate decision and charged across open ground toward the outlaws. His unexpected attack caught Fletcher off guard. Tom tackled the outlaw leader before he could bring his gun to bear. They rolled in dirt, fighting desperately for control of Fletcher's weapon. Finally, Tom managed to get his hands on the gun. Fletcher, beaten, raised his hands in surrender. "It's over," Tom panted, training the weapon on the remaining outlaws. Joaquin emerged from the barn, covering the wounded man. Later that evening, after Sheriff Crawford had taken the outlaws into custody, Tom sat on his porch with Joaquin and Aiyana. The crisis had passed, but all understood their lives had changed forever. "She cannot stay here," Joaquin said quietly. "Others will come." Tom looked at Aiyana, who had been silent since emerging from the cellar. "What do you want to do?" She spoke in Apache to her uncle. Joaquin translated thoughtfully. "She say she want to go to reservation now, but she want you to visit. She say you are family." Tom felt tears sting his eyes. "Tell her she will always have a home here. Always." 6 months later, Tom made his third journey to the reservation. Each visit he found Aiyana growing stronger and more confident, but she always ran to greet him with the same joy. "Uncle Tom," she said in improving English as they watched the sunset, "I not forget what you do. Someday I help others like you help me." Tom smiled, knowing this remarkable girl would indeed make a difference. Their story began with crying at dawn, but became something beautiful, proof that compassion can cross any divide. Sometimes, family is found in the most unexpected places.